Chapter 10. The King Tides. Stretching luxuriously out on the bank, I prepared to enjoy the very last smoke of tobacco. Charlie would smoke longer. He was denying himself just for the pleasure of smoking during the long night to come when I should have no tobacco. Not that he would have any extra tobacco. He had been scrupulously fair and had divided the last that was left. But his bushcraft would give him a smoke apart from that. He was saving and drying the tea leaves after the last possible sip of tea had been stewed out of them. He was collecting shreds of some kind of seaweed too, and drying them with the tea leaves. I was not supposed to know, but I did. Two men on a tiny island can know quite a lot of one another's doings without saying anything about it. In a number of ways he seemed to be regarding our stay on the island as of long duration, regardless of the fact that the ketch must come and pick us up when the wind came. But I was in a wonderful humor, felt absolutely independent, and thrilled with a triumph of prehistoric man. I knew how to find fish and spear them, knew where the big crabs were. I could not starve. Feeling like a good yarn, I tried to make friends with Charlie, but was not hurt much when he hardly growled an answer. Now and again he would turn from his bunk to poke a stick of the chocolate wood closer and to its fellows, so that always a wisp of perfume smoke was slowly ascending to keep life in the mist that constantly filled the closed-in tent. We were forced to keep the tent practically sealed. Outside, through the otherwise silent night, came the ceaseless shrill of the sandflies. "How's the scope working?" "All right." "How much longer will this calm last?" "How the hell do I know?" I smoked that pipe down to the very charcoal in the wood, blowing the last ghostly whiff up into the scented smoke. That smoke used to rise while slowly spreading out right to the ridgepole, and hover there as it thinned out before, slowly creeping as vapor back down the sides of the tent. That's what we called live smoke, when it would rise and hover. When it sank back down the sides of the tent to fade away towards the floor, we called it dead smoke. We had learnt how to regulate the smoldering sticks now so that a minimum smoke coil allowed us to breathe in some comfort, while its pungency was just sufficient to keep out the sandflies. Evidently the peculiarly penetrating and pungent scent from the smoke exerted a very powerful effect upon the insect devil's breathing apparatus. The nights in the tent were stifling outside, but for that weird shrill from countless billions of insects, there was an utter silence of sky, sea, and island. I've never even heard of such a plague of sandflies before. Where do they come from? The sand. Some say they breed in the mangroves. Then when a wind comes, they are swept for miles up or down the coast and land on the nearest place handy when the wind drops. I wish these had dropped into the sea. Just as well there's a limit to insect hosts, or they'd eat our nations. I've known a plague of caterpillars eat out a tribe's hunting grounds, said Charlie. They came and ate every blade of grass, even the fallen leaves from the trees. It was the strangest thing. They ate the country enclosed in that particular tribal area to the last blade of grass, then vanished. All the game cleared out into the surrounding country. It was a rough circle of country bounded by 3 other tribes. The edges of that circle were green timber and grass. Inside it was just bare earth. The niggers had to follow the game or starve. But wherever they turned towards the grass country, they were met by hostile spearmen. Witch doctors had spread the word that the tribe was accursed, that a great devil had spread the plague amongst them, and that if any member of that tribe was allowed to hunt on any other tribe's ground, the caterpillars would come there too. What happened? The tribe was wiped out. Charlie would not talk any more. Still, it had been an agreeable ending to a great day. I dozed, watching Charlie morosely arranging the sticks of wood for the night. After several nights, the ends would smolder so far away from one another that they would die out. Charlie, being the lighter sleeper, always woke up first. Night after night I had half awakened with a drowsy grunt, knowing more than seeing Charlie bending over the fire sticks. With relief-giving smoke, the devilish tormentors would disappear and sleep come again. But for the recurrent after-effects of the awful wound in his side, Charlie would have been a splendid mate. The poor wretch was suffering a lot of pain, but was cracking hearty. All very well for these tough men. For myself, I've always appreciated a little sympathy. A man with a current hurt like Charlie should never have left civilization and the prompt medical treatment available there. But then a man used to wandering in the wild places, free and untrammeled, and glorying in being independent of civilization, would break his heart if change, the very thing he prided himself he could live without. I fell asleep and jumped out of my bunk hours later with face and arms covered with stinging insects, nostrils, lips, ears, eyelids burning from their bites. Frantically rubbing face and neck, I groped for the matches. Charlie was snoring brokenly. His insides would be bad tomorrow. What caused him to sleep so soundly tonight? In the fire I struck a match. It was beside Charlie, against his side of the tent, and his bunk was so shielded by a shirt and bag that the smoke was thrown back and floated only over him. The supply of perfumed wood was gone. The match burned right down. I ran out into the night, scrambled about the beach for wood, and got a taste of what it feels like to be eaten alive. As I ran madly back into the tent, the shrilling blanket of insects came too, driving me cursing mad. As I lashed tight the tent door, thrashing arms and face and neck, I almost howled before the fire kindled into flame. I could have torn Charlie limb from limb. The fire gave out very little smoke. It meant another rush to the beach and frantic tearing down of a branch to rush back and throw green leaves on the fire. That smoke filled our eyes and nostrils and throats and almost smothered us. It was a night of utter wretchedness, relieved only by the sweet knowledge that Charlie must suffer too. When at long last dawn came, I searched the little beach around the lagoon in vain for more of the chocolate-colored wood. There was not a chip, but I found a dry, pulpy log of softwood, carried it back to camp, and threw it by my side of the tent. Then I snatched up the spear and went fishing for breakfast, and got two. I speared them savagely and surely, then jumped into the water, keeping the weight on the haft, but not pushing the prongs through, while the fish was struggling. When he stretched out, gasping, a sudden firm pressure on the haft sent the prongs through deep into the sand. Then, still holding the haft, I bent down and pushed one hand under the fish until the fingers gripped the prong points, held these tightly, and lifted spear and fish and all. As the days passed by, experience made expert in the essential details, where to expect and how to detect a fish, how to spear and lift him by the spear, then flip him out among the mangroves, or bend down and grip him by the gills, how to slip him with others along a spiked stick, and so carry them easily hitched to the belt. And a way of breathing came, frequent, quick little snorting breaths that drove the sandflies from the nostrils when they were very bad. The tides now were very big, flooding in higher and higher, till a morning came when only the tops of the mangrove forest were above water. That day we watched the water come creeping out of the mangroves and up to suck at the grass on the little flat. This silent blow from the sea seemed the deliberate threat of an overwhelming enemy, for it almost robbed us of food supply. Not only was the forest submerged, but the great reef was under many feet of water. The tides were so big that they practically remained stationary. For days the mangroves were swamped, and as this left no creeks in which the fish could concentrate. We couldn't fish. The crabs solved the problem, for they came pouring out of the mangroves when the rising waters brought them easy foods not only from the sea but from the island. Their burrows now being feet under water, the crabs were hard to locate, for they spread out, scouting in the shallow water over the island, having the time of their lives as each new tide level enabled them to forage still further for insects in the grass. We waited spear in hand among the grass tufts, seeking the gleam in the brilliant sunlight of big blue or purple or green shell that should betray the adventurous crab. Wonderful forest, rich with new and rarely attainable foods, those grasses must have appeared to the crabs. Charlie would not spear in my crab colony. He wandered in the opposite direction along the mangroves from the lagoon edge in front of the camp. The waters from the mangrove forest and the lagoon were now meeting. Charlie watched for any stray crab that ventured into the grass from the lagoon side. He would have nothing to do with my crab colony. One morning we awoke to find the grasses at the base of the hill and peak all under water, only the taller tufts showing here and there. Sun and sky were hot and brazen. We could see shellfish and quaint sea insects crawling busily among the roots and grasses. There was a deathly stillness over the island. The tortured birds had hardly called at all since the sandflies came. But today marked the first day of utter silence. Not even a leaf stirred. Everything was given up to things of the water. Our only dry ground was microscopic now. We should have realized this menace of the king tides, but the strange environment, torture of the sandflies, and the longing for a wind to break the calm had kept all thoughts of anything else from our heads. The bloodshot eyes of Charlie, the grim, stubbornly closed mouth, told that he was suffering pain too much to safeguard against anything at all. It was when Charlie came wading back from the well that an awful feeling gripped me. I knew. Charlie said something as he passed the galley fireplace. His face was deeply drawn. He walked heavily into the tent and stretched out on his bunk. I went up the tiny rise on which the camp was built, then down a few feet, and was into the water of the king tides. It was a long way to the well. I never dreamt the distance was so far. A huge green crab scuttled from the water-logged grasses, his great nippers raised menacingly as he backed away. When near the well, I saw on the mangrove branches above it a little crowd of birds closely huddled together, wings limply outstretched, beaks open, gasping under the brazen sun. One glance was sufficient. The tide had overflowed the well.